Last week we did a whole bunch of wrestling with the problems that arise in Joshua, the ground level stuff, the nitty gritty, the murder, the genocide, whatever you want to call it. Basically the stories of conquest. And what I want to do this week is I want to take a 10,000 foot perspective, and I want to ask the question of what is God up to? So the conquest isn't just about victory and triumph. That's how a lot of us read it from our Western world of triumphal politics. That's why, as I said last week, I was encouraged to read it as a kid, because it's full of action and battles, and you can use your imagination a little bit and sort of I picture this wizened old, wiry warrior in Caleb whenever I hear that read. Maybe read too much David Gemmell stuff and thinking Druss the Conqueror, for those David Gemmell fans amongst you. Or I mean, nothing to you if you're not a David Gemmell fan. But anyway, but really the biblical narrative is much more about location, much more about Phil and Christy, location. And the question is, why this chunk of dirt? Why does God work so hard to give his people this particular chunk of real estate? And that's what I want to pull apart today and see what the implications are. And so we have some pictures for you, like I said, and we've got some maps that I've sort of ripped off a website called followtherabbi.com. So if you want to explore this a little bit more, go check them out, because they are much smarter, much better. Here's my work, kind of thing. This is my source. But anyway, let's pull up the first one. First one is this map. And hopefully you can see on there, it kind of gives you a snapshot of a civilized world in the biblical era. As you can see, there's Rome up on the sort of left-hand side, then you've got Greece. Over on the right, you've got Assyria, Persia, Babylon. Down in the south, you've got Egypt. And down on the right, sort of southeast, you've got desert, you've got Midbar. And that's just sort of wasteland. And in the biblical era, there's nothing in that wasteland. It's uncivilized. But you're going to have the spice trade and the trade route, which is that kind of yellow arrow type of thing. That historians are going to say this is the bit that really, really matters. The chunk of dirt that God gives his people is that little bit in the middle. You can kind of see it. It's a bit green, and the trade route goes right through the middle of it. Historians often call that bit of ground the crossroads of the earth. And it sits right in between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. And if you wanted to go anywhere in the ancient world, you had to cross through this chunk of dirt. And there was one main highway actually split into 2 or 3 different highways, but it was one main highway, and it was called the Via Maris. The Via Maris is how you got anywhere in the ancient world. It's also how you would connect up what we know as the Silk Road, that goes through modern Turkey or ancient biblical Asia and Asia Minor. So when you read the Bible and you go like Asia, we're not thinking Asia of our time. It's actually more sort of Turkey and slightly east into Persia and stuff. So the main highway goes from north to south, and if any commerce is going to take place, any global connections on any level, particularly commercial, let alone travel of any sort, you're going to go through by land, and you're going to go through this land that is the most prized possession. And if you want to, and this is what becomes Israel, or is Canaan before the conquest. And it is, like I say, it's the most prized chunk of real estate, because if you want to control trade, if you want to have an impact on commerce, that is the place to be. It's a narrow point. Everything's got to come through it. And if you wanted to be in the middle of all of it, this is where you're going to be. If you were to flash back to Torah, and our study of Abraham, Abraham was told that, well, you tell me, what did God tell Abraham he was going to do? What was his main purpose? To be a, begins with B, ends in lessing. To be a blessing to the nations. He's going to bless all the nations. Now, if that's still God's mission, do you think that that's probably still what God's up to in this story? To be a blessing to all the nations? It is, isn't it? And if Abraham and his descendants are going to bless all the nations, that would be how many nations in the world? All of them. Isn't he? And he's probably not going to put them over kind of in the corner, and he's not going to put them in the south, below Egypt or anything like that. What he's going to do, he's going to put them right in the middle as his kingdom of priests. Think about the tabernacle. The tabernacle was right in the middle. And if he's going to have a priesthood for the whole world, they're going to need to be situated right in the center so everybody can see what it means to have a relationship with Yahweh. You see, this is the connection. Where was the tabernacle? The tabernacle was right in the middle of his people, wasn't it? Right in the middle of the camp. So if you're going to look at this map and you're going to see where Israel is, you're going to be smack bang right in the middle of it all. And that's where God needs his priesthood to be. That's where, where everybody has easy access to them. And easy access to the priesthood. And if God's going to show the world what he's like, that where they're going to have to be where everybody can see them. And this mission, the Conquests, we wrestled with all the questions last week. When it comes to its function, let's just think about this practically and functionally. God needs this chunk of dirt if he's going to accomplish his mission. Now, if you go to the next slide, please, Ben. Oh, it's a little bit closer than, never mind. You can see part of how the land's broken up. We'll see it a little bit later, a bit more better. But this is how some of the tribes were meant to be. So that big blue bit on the side is the Med, and then you've got Judah and Dan and Benjamin and Ephraim, because they were all allotted their own space. This is part of what we're reading in chapter 14. And if you were to continue reading, you would read about the allotment of Judah, and then into the allotment of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all that sort of stuff. And it would connect into all these different places on there, because God, the 12 tribes were descended from the 12 sons of Jacob, not in their entirety, because you might remember Levi got a special assignment, and you won't see Levi on this map anywhere, because Levi were the priests. So they didn't have an inheritance. God is their inheritance. Joseph, you might remember, he got, I won't say lost, but he took a different path towards the end of Genesis. And his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, they were adopted by Jacob, which brought the number back to 12. And Levi got a special job. Joseph's two sons were given a place, given in place of Joseph. And so we have the full 12 tribes. And you can look at this map and you can see that God gave not only this chunk of real estate to his whole people, but within this chunk of real estate, every one of those tribes, each one of the descendants also had a chunk of real estate. They also had part of the land. And it wasn't just their chunk of real estate, but, and we'll get towards this at the end of the talk today, but it was really significant that they were where they were. So this is how it all got mapped out. Everybody got a piece of a pie. Everybody got part of the land to care for, to look after. Everybody got a piece of the mission. And everybody got a piece of the land. And it sounds very much like the parish system of the Church of England, if you ask me. We all have our parishes and we all have our things to do. And actually, the theory is that if we all do mission together, the whole of England would be reached and converted and brought into relationship with Jesus. That's the whole point of the parish system. We kind of went, oh, this seems like a good plan. Let's use it. Now, if we go on to the next slide, which I hope is still quite... Anyway, what you see here is kind of like how the land functions, because I heard one teacher explain it like this, that the land kind of functions like a BLT sandwich, which may be the most unkosher illustration to talk about Israel ever, but there we are. He said you can think about this land like two buns or two halves of a bun, and then you have some lettuce and some tomato and strips of bacon in the middle. And if you look at the map, you can understand where he's coming from. You have Galilee down at the bottom. Sorry, it's up at the top, which you can't see on the map, unfortunately. And you have the deserts of the Negev, and if you keep going on the map, you see Paran. Oh, you see me. And then you can see Zin. I'm a northern and southern conscience. And basically, what you've got is then coastal plains and then desert and mountains and stuff. And the real estate is that bit where it says Fila, but it should say Shila, or Shephelah. And the Shephelah is the bit that really gets looked at and taken over and conquered. And these are the places that you want to live. This is the zone in the middle, and it's the hill country. And like I say, and Shephelah literally means bow down or to kneel. And it's where the lands bow down. The Judah mountains bow down to the coastal plain, not in spiritual reverence sense, but in a physical high to low sense. And you have the hill country, which becomes for the rabbi's metaphor of how God's people are called to impact culture. God put them at the crossroads of the earth, and here's another metaphor, not just of the turnstile of the crossroads of the earth, but missionally, what it means to live at the crossroads of the earth is to live in the Shephelah, to live in the place where the mountains of God's people meet the coastal plain of the pagans. And we're supposed to live in this collision of these two cultures to impact and engage culture in a way that brings shalom to the chaos or this tale of two kingdoms. And by giving people a place to experience what worship is, it's really important. And we might say let's invade the empire and the imperial narrative of the world with the kingdom of God, the kingdom of shalom. And that becomes kind of a metaphor of actually showing people that there's a different way of taking ground and a different way of behaving and a different way of engaging with the world. There we are. Superb, thank you. Kind of ish. We had to split it over two slides. Sort of. Awesome. So a couple more metaphors to continue to bridge this gap. Joshua and Judges, and continue to make the same point. The next picture on our presentation is a diagram that depicts what's known as a tell. So can we go to that? There we are. Awesome. So if you're looking at this picture, which hopefully you are, because I've put it up there on the screen for you to see, what you'll see is the first original city that would have been built, which is depicted in blue. Can you see it at the bottom, the blue bit? Yeah, awesome. And somewhere along the way, that city gets destroyed. The enemy kind of levels it. And the next people that come along then just build on top of it, which is kind of the green bit. Why build on top of it? Well, why not go elsewhere? Well, firstly, because if you don't build on top of it, you're wasting precious real estate, because all around it's probably valuable farmland, which leads to my second point. The tell is there because it provides all the things that you need for a healthy civilization. It should provide defense. It should provide a way to pursue agriculture and farming. It should, most importantly, have a water source, which you've got to remember in those places was incredibly scarce. So if you found a water source, you built on top of it, you built around it. The tell is sitting where it is for a reason, probably based mostly on the fact that there is a water source. And you can't just move the city. You can't just move that water source. You need the city in the exact same place as the old city. So you just build up some more dirt. And you plant your new city on top of the old city. And you have the blue city, and now you have the light green city, and then that city gets destroyed, and then 400 years later along comes the next new group of people that wants to rebuild the city, and they do, and you get the idea, and it keeps building on top of, top. And actually, we can see this for ourselves, even in this country. You don't have to go too far at all. We're originally, well, I'm originally from Yorkshire, but Annie and I got married and settled in Hull, and my kids are born in Hull, and there's part right near the Princess Quay main shopping centre. There's excavations of the old Roman fortifications in Hull, but you have to drop down about 20 foot because the new city's been built on top of it. It's the same in London. It's the same in York. It's the same, apart from York's got walls, but you know, there's parts of it which are built on top. It's probably exactly the same in Durham. You know, might even be the same in parts of Washington. And so you kind of get the idea. It's built level upon level upon level. So the next couple of pictures are what it would look like to see it with the naked eye today. It's a hill, and it's another hill, and you might be walking around thinking, oh, there's a hill. Got to walk up that hill. And to us, you know, that's probably all we'd think. But archaeologists get really excited when they see this sort of stuff. Kind of just looks like a big pile of dirt, but underneath those big piles of dirt, are 1,000 to 2,000 years of cities built on top of one another. And this is how archaeological digs are done. And I say all that to give a bit of understanding, a bit of context to what we're about ready to say, because if you go to the next slide, one of the things that you'll uncover, or will hope to uncover whenever we do archaeological digs, and I say we, I've never done one, but you know, let's take a bit of ownership when we do this. You know, it's one of the things that we hope to find is the city gates, as pristine as that, or not. Although if you're Indiana Jones, you probably do find city gates as pristine as that. Now, the city gates always form part of what? A wall. Absolutely, a wall, a big wall. And now that's a problem, because if you have put a hole in a wall, if you're not going to be able to, if you don't put a hole in the wall, you're not going to be able to get into the city, are you? Or out. But equally, if you've put a hole in the wall, then you've made yourself open for attack, haven't you? And so you have very naturally have a city gate. Now these city gates become part of the defense of the city, and they get more and more complex in their technology of defending the city as the centuries pass, because basically people figure out how to beat the defenses, so they have to become more intricate. And so it started off in Abraham's day, and these city gates would just have a couple of chambers on either side. And you'd have a room on the right and a room on the left, and you'd put soldiers in these rooms, and if people tried to get through the door, you could only get maybe 3 people through the door at any one time, and so these mass group of soldiers would be able to kill them and defend their city and stop them from coming in. Oh, you've jumped on a bit too quick, but there we are. It's all right. You can leave that up, and you can keep on doing this. You keep putting soldiers in rooms, and it just creates these bottlenecks that eventually become really difficult to penetrate. And they go maybe from 6 rooms to 8 rooms, and so on and so forth. And then they add floors on and all sorts of stuff. And like I say, this is a bit of a cutaway image. And as you can see, kind of, well, certainly on my right-hand side, so I'm guessing it'll be on your right-hand side of the picture, there's the sort of antechambers, and there's a room up at the top and stuff. And actually, this is part of a gate from Solomon's day, and this would have been a 6-chambered gate. 8-chambered gates come in Hezekiah's day. So when you read about the battles in Kings and stuff like that, and how Jerusalem was defeated and sacked and stuff, then you've got a picture like 8 chambers, people getting through all of that. David's day had 4 chambers, 2 on each side, and so this is the Solomonic gate, and actually that's it. Depicted from a place called Tel Giza, which we can show you a picture of in just a moment. The technology becomes so advanced, actually, that you can no longer even penetrate a city through its gate. So that's when you end up having to find ways of knocking the wall down. And there's no way you can get through there. It's too good. The defenses are too good. It's like these two floored gates that you see in this diagram, this cutaway. They're dropping rocks on the enemy and hot oil and boiling water and all that sort of thing, so that to make sure that it's just too costly to try to come through them. Which is why they start building siege engines and ramps and all that sort of stuff. Now the thing about the city gates, in fact, and we can go to the next slide here. We actually have some pictures of chambers. So that's the start of a chamber, and this is the gate at Tel Dan. For anybody who's been there, anybody? No, that's all right, man. I can say what I want. If the next slide actually shows a picture of Solomon's Gate at Giza, and these are pictures of the remains of gates. This is all that's kind of left, and to us, certainly to me anyway, they look like piles of rocks. There's a bit of design around them and stuff, but archaeologists get really excited about it. But it's all about defending the city, and your city only comes under attack on average once every century or so. About every 80 years, the estimate is. And some cities, that happens more than others, depending on their location. But when your city's only falling under attack maybe once a generation or so. So what do you do for the rest of the century? Well, you live in peace and harmony. If it's only 80 years, you have to put this gate to use somehow. And all throughout the story of the scriptures, we heard about people sitting in the city gates. Lot was in the city gate. Eli, in the story of Judges that you will read about, he's sitting in the city gate because the city became the place where all the city's business was done. And you'll find politicians, you'd find the mayor, the city clerk, all the people of importance would come and hang out at the city gates. You might even find royalty just hanging around. See, I wish it was that easy today to go and chat to your politicians and put them right and tell them what needs doing. I wish we could just go down to the city gate and find our representatives. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But now you have to sort of book an appointment and all that sort of thing. But that's how it was in their day. In fact, if you want to talk about the stock exchange in Israel today, it's still called Sahar Shahar, which is the word for gate. The stock exchange is actually still named after this concept. And the Hebrew word for gate is sha'ar. Now, not only would this be a place for your courthouse, but this would be a place where your judges would sit and stuff. So as we continue to read through, and we're going to go on to Judges next week, so I encourage you to read it. This is where people would be found. It's where, if you was in need, you'd go and you would receive the things that you need. And if you go to our next slide, we're going to see that picture of the tell again. And you can imagine a city sitting on top of a hill, and the city on top of a hill would have a wall. And what do you suppose? Who do you suppose lives inside the city wall? Do you suppose that's pretty advantageous real estate? Well, part of me wants to say yes, but maybe if someone's breaking in, they're breaking into your house before they get to the rest of the city, so maybe no. What about inside the wall? What about all the way inside the city? See, right inside the city, that's choice, and I want to be inside the city walls, completely protected. But that's where kind of your upper crust would be, your upper class people would be. Now, most middle class people actually lived inside the city walls, and it would be what was called casement housing. And the wall was actually constructed like these multiple apartment complexes, and you can read about this in Nehemiah. I was going to say Hezekiah, but it was the wrong person. In Nehemiah, where they rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, and they give it to different families to rebuild the walls. And you wonder why as a Westerner, but really what they're doing is they're building their houses. As they build the wall, they're building where they're going to live. The reason they did this is because if a city ever came under attack, you could actually fill your house with stone, and what it would do is it would make the wall, instead of being 8 foot thick, to be 30 foot thick. And it's a brilliant move. And you might remember stories like Rahab, or stories like Paul, who's lowered out of a window on the outside of a city. And again, kind of us, we kind of think, well, that's a bit weird. Where on earth do we get a window in a wall? But that's because that was their house. And so they did have windows in the wall. And so when Rahab lowers the spies outside the window, they're just outside the city gate. They're just going down. And that's your kind of middle class people. So we can make an assumption that maybe Rahab was doing quite well in her trade. The people who are in need, the poor, the distressed, they end up outside the city walls in little villages, which are often called daughters. And you might remember Jesus, when he's on his way to the cross, he says, don't weep for me, daughters of Jerusalem. And he's not talking about women here. He's actually making a reference to the villages where the poor live outside of Jerusalem. He's telling the poor not to weep for him. Every major city would have had what was called daughters, little villages where there was no walls, no protection, but where the poor would live. And if the enemy ever came, they had to run from those daughters into the main city. And if they didn't get there in time, they were locked out. Now, if you just jump back a slide to the picture, that's the one, to a picture of the Solomonic Gate, you'll see that there's a big trench right in the middle, yeah? Can you see that? That's actually a sewer line. And they might have a water source that they open maybe once or twice a day and flush all the sewage out of that trench. And it would have been covered with pavers, so you wouldn't have seen it, and you probably wouldn't have even smelt it, to be honest. Certainly not as bad as what you would imagined anyway. And that would have all been flushed out into the main rubbish dump, which sat outside the city. And it would have flowed down the hill to a designated area where the sewage would flow, and that became the same area which became a city rubbish dump. And if you remember not wanting to use a whole load of real estate because the rest of it would have been used for agriculture, but it was really important that the sewage and the rubbish and everything just went to the same place. And so they take the trash out, they take the rubbish out, and they set fire to it. But because it was also getting damp with sewage, it didn't really burn, it just kind of smoldered. And it's a smouldering place where the rubbish, one of the things that they called the place was the place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. I hope this is kind of ringing some bells for some of you. And that's a reference to the poor. The weeping and gnashing of teeth is that sorry, I have to try to get my Hebrew pronunciation correct with my dodgy Yorkshire bit. Tsa agah. That misery of the poor and be oppressed. That's what it reflects to. And I say this to give you a picture of the city. You have a city on a hill, and you have the wealthy inside, and you have the middle class in the casement housing, and you have the poor outside the city, and you have the poorest of the poor living in this dump. Now, Jesus actually makes a comment about this, and we could talk much more about this, and we will when we get some time, when we get on to Matthew, because we're going to be looking at Matthew in detail. But just listen to this. He says this, he says, you are the salt of the earth. This is Jesus talking. You are the salt of the earth. But if it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? If it is no longer good for anything, it's set to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, yet let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. He refers to this very picture that we're looking at on the tell. If you can flip back, please. Nope, tell. Nope, back to the tell. There we are. And you have a picture of a city on a hill. What Jesus is saying is, if you are poor, what does that city represent to you? Wealth. It's where the rich live. It's for people who are better in the worldly sense than you, who are more valuable in a worldly sense than you. And yet he's saying, you are a city on the hill. See, they're also the people who have more than enough. And while you probably do have somewhat of a disdain, like we're talking about, you have this, I wish I was them kind of jealousy from the poor. I wish I was able to live in those places. I wish I was able to do this. And in some ways, the city on the hill is your hope. Those city gates we found throughout our archaeological studies, every city we've uncovered it's where it's going to be the welfare system, the distribution centre, the place for food banks and healing and doctors and healthcare and education. The city gate becomes a place where the wealthy brought their abundance, and it was rationed out and given to the poor who came to the city gates for help. The city gates, the city on a hill, is our picture of hope. And when Jesus says to the people in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. He says, you are the hope of the earth. Completely, utterly transformational. The world looks to you to find shalom in their chaos. That again becomes the same picture of what God is wanting to do with his people at the crossroads. He's putting his people at the crossroads of the earth so that they can be the light of the world. They can be the city on the hill. They can be a kingdom of priests. He's putting them right in the middle of it all so that the world can look to them for their hope. Now, on some level, it's very general. Even the pagans would do this. If you were to bring a visiting king into your city, one of the things that you would want to show off is your welfare system, how you looked after the poor. If you're going to be a great king, you would make sure that actually even those who didn't have enough got something. Everybody would want to be able to walk through their cities and say, look at all this stuff. We are so wealthy, we take care of those who have nothing. And let me tell you of the numbers. And we fed, thousands of people today, blah, blah, blah. You kind of get this concept that's used as a bragging point. And it's one of the ways that we have always, all kinds of nations, thumped our chest and said, look how we take care of everyone. We even do it today. What's one of the things this nation boasts about, and rightly so? National Health Service. Absolutely. Kind of look over at the states and go like, why don't you do this? And they look at us and go, why do you do that? And that's, but it's one of those things that kind of says this is what makes us different. Now, the heart that lies behind it is totally a different thing. What the listeners to the Sermon on the Mount are hearing in the context of Roman occupation is a little tricky. It's a little tricky because if you buy into the Roman ideology, life goes really well for you. They are definitely a city on a hill. That's what Romans want to say. We are a city on a hill. We take care of you. We give you healthcare, we give you education, we give you entertainment. Everything you could ever want, Rome gives you, running water. And if you don't buy into the Roman system, well, you're out of luck. And it's an interesting dynamic with the listeners on the Sermon of the Hill. So one last observation as we wrap up. And that was, I wanted to go back to that map that we had earlier. So if you put slide 13 up, yep, that'll do. So that's a far better one. This is what it should look like early on. Blocking me out as well, that's always good. It showed, so it's got the 12 tribes of Israel. And you'll notice everybody on this map has their place, has their own chunk of land. And it's not just about the chunk of dirt that you got. It was also about the mission that you had. This chunk of dirt came with a mission, and here's what I mean by that. If you look down on the map, you find a slice of land that belongs to the tribe of Dan. Can you see it? So it's just above Judah. I've appeared. Ta-da! Just above Judah and just below Ephraim, and bordering the Mediterranean Sea. And so it's kind of like an L-shaped slice of dirt there towards there. Judah is the big one. Simeon is right in the middle of Judah. Now, Dan was given this small little chunk of dirt, and it fits within a photo frame, to be quite honest. A small chunk of dirt. But they're also bordering the Philistines. And they didn't just get this chunk of dirt, they also got a mission. Dan received a mission of impacting and bringing shalom to the Philistine chaos, to bringing peace to the Philistines. Now, I'm going to show you the next slide, which is where everything actually ended up. So can you see that? So it looks a little bit different, doesn't it? Can you see where Dan is? Dan's all the way at the top. He's in brown. See, Dan is not where he's supposed to be. And when you read this in the book of Judges, which we'll get to later, Dan totally forsakes his mission. They're like, Philistines, man, I don't want to do that. By the way, do you see the Philistines on the map? Yeah? It's down there, isn't it? Was it there on the original map? No. See, Dan jumped out of their calling. They forsook the mission that God gave them. They went up north because they were like, man, forget this. I don't want to do that. I want to go somewhere else. And now here's the problem with that. There's so much of this context too, but for the sake of our conversation, this is what we'll do with this. If you were to jump back to the last map, thank you. First of all, look, again, there isn't any Philistines. Everybody's doing their job. And if you were to think in terms of, if I'm Dan and I'm going to want some help, do you notice anything about where Dan's located when it comes to help? Who's going to help him? Judah. Yeah. Big brother Judah. Judah is also known as what? The Lion of the tribe of Judah. This power, this massive tribe, the most powerful tribe, Dan has his big brother right beside him. Judah's hanging out right there. In fact, when you read the story in Judges, the story of Samson, Samson's from Dan. And Samson gets himself in some trouble. And the Philistines come out and get Samson. Who shows up immediately in the story? Judah does. Judah's like, hey, everybody calm down. What's going on? Let's chill out. And it's this great socio-political force. And they're like, really calm down, what's going on? And you see, Judah had Dan's back. Now, if you go back to that last slide, you see that they're in a different place, in a different countries, and they're far, far, far up from north. And if Babylon is going to come in, if Assyria is going to come in, if Persia is going to come in, if the Greeks are going to come in, where are they going to come into first? They're going to come into Dan. Dan's going to get absolutely pummeled every single time. Dan's going down. They forsake their mission. In fact, Dan will get pummeled out of existence. Dan will eventually get hit so many times by incoming armies from the north that they fall out of existence. And when you read your book of Revelation, fun fact, Dan isn't listed amongst the tribes. The implication there is that if you don't seize the mission of God, if you don't realize what God's called you to do and fulfill your role, you may lose your part in the story. It's a little bit scary, that, isn't it? But if we opt out, there's implications. Anyway, this whole lesson I wanted to be about the crossroads of the earth. Can we put that first slide back up, please? What does it mean to live at the crossroads at the earth? It means being in the middle of the action. It means seizing what you're called to do, which is to engage culture. It means being the city gates and providing sustenance to the world around you. It means being the city on the hill, the hope for the whole world. It means not forsaking the call that God has given you, but fulfilling the role that we know God's laid upon your family and as individuals. And if we bring it into today's world, it means fulfilling our priorities as a church, as a Christian subculture. These are the things that we can learn from the book of Joshua and the book of Judges. We'll get onto this next week. There's a reason why God wanted those people, his people, in the center of the world, at the crossroads of the earth, to be that example to the people around them. It's why God has placed us here. I love the story of this place for this parish. Because when this was built, the church was asked, not the individuals, but the bishop and moderators and all that sort of stuff who made decisions, said, where do you want the church to be as we build this new estate? And they picked this place where we are seated right now because this is the center of the parish. And my gosh, it doesn't have ramifications for me and for you, but we get to live out a different way to demonstrate to people what being a city on a hill really means. And it doesn't matter if you don't live in the parish. If you live elsewhere, you come and worship here. And so we get to be this for the rest of the Northeast. For the rest of the United Kingdom, dare I say. And that's not grandiose, but it's about living differently. Amen? Amen. Let's finish there because it's 1:15.